I've been in the military for 34 years. When you set a retirement date, you get reflective, and something amazing just occurred to me. In my 34 years of service, the military has come full circle as an inclusive organization. From a purposeful intent to inflict public shame on me by issuing a dishonorable discharge if I didn't completely hide my life and my identity, to an organization that provides me more tangible workplace benefits and protections than my wife and I are going to find in many communities when we drive out of the Fort Belvoir gate for the very last time. I'm actually a little nervous about retirement because I have seemingly more protections for my lesbian identity in the Army than out of the Army. It's mind-blowing. But those rights and benefits, they were a long time coming. I remember so clearly that 1980s Army recruiting ad campaign with that jingle, "Be all that you can be." I had just been awarded a 4-year Army scholarship, and I was singing that in my head as I was on my way to the University of Oregon. That scholarship meant so much to me. It meant that I could get a college education, sure, but it also meant that I had a ticket out of my small town. Many of you had the same dream, to find your way out of a small town, to find something bigger, maybe more meaningful, to find yourself. I guess I was headed to be all that I could be. But I arrived at the university and I walked into a problem. The year I started college, the Department of Defense established an exclusionary policy very specific to homosexuals. Before, it was not uncommon to get kicked out of the military for overt homosexual activity. What was different about the new 1981 policy is that simply being perceived as or admitting that you had homosexual tendencies meant that you would, and these words were actually in the policy, that you would disrupt good order and discipline. The straight soldiers, they would lose wars. The policy was a problem because about this time in my life, I discovered that I had some of those homosexual tendencies. So my first order of business in the military was to learn to hide. Only a month into my Army experience, and I learned that be all that you can be, it didn't actually apply to me. Because the Army, they didn't really want me as me. It was a time of repression in the military. It had moved from an approach where you were likely to be kicked out if you were discovered to straight up witch hunts designed to find you and to put so much pressure on you that you were compelled to rat out your friends. Criminal investigators pretending to be lesbians and going to the gay bars in military towns, offering to buy you a drink and then entrapping you because you accepted. Or calling you down to the military police interrogation room for a little talk about the softball team. And wouldn't it be a shame if your parents found out the kind of girls that you spend time with? A health and welfare inspection for your own good, in which officers entered your barracks, went through your personal things looking for contraband, including flipping through your diary and looking at your letters. I know that some of you experienced this. Or those horrible phone calls I would get around midnight when I was at Fort Polk, an inviting voice telling me, "I've seen you around. I'm desperate to meet another woman who's like me. Will you meet me for dinner sometime?" And hanging up the phone, hands shaking, desperate in my own way to stay hidden, to the point of unplugging my phone at night so the calls stopped interrupting my sleep, but then plugging my phone back in because I couldn't risk missing a phone call for a deployment alert. Constant pressure to be someone that you were not in order for people to believe that you were someone who could be all that you could be. It's hard to connect how I felt going through the military in the 80s and 90s with what it feels like today. Because today, I experience full inclusion and belonging. In those early years, it seemed simple to set part of me aside and to live a life afraid to answer my phone or unable to keep my letters or a journal. or to pretend that my partner didn't really exist. It seemed like a small price to pay for the privilege to serve my country. And it is a privilege. But the real price that many paid was entirely different. I've met too many people who got kicked out and still hold pain in their heart that their country cast their service and their commitment aside like it was nothing. I remember 1993 so clearly, where there was a national debate with the election of President Clinton about should open service be allowed. But it wasn't allowed. Instead, we got the compromise law that became known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell. At the time, I remember thinking that this was progress. No more witch hunts, and at least an acknowledgement that we existed, that we serve the nation too. But over time, that compromise was revealed to be the same trap as the other policy, with over 13,650 service members kicked out as homosexuals between 1994 and 2011, cast aside and demeaned, despite volunteering to serve our nation, despite being willing to give their life for their country. I circle back around to that Army recruiting slogan, be all you can be, and I sort of get that in 1981 that it wasn't meant for me. But now I have more perspective, and I understand how I never even came close to being that. I was just trying to be enough, just enough to balance my life between two worlds so that I could serve my nation. But something amazing happened when we fast forward my service to 2011, because people like you who believed in equality and who spoke up for me because I was unable to speak for myself, the law that became known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was repealed. I had been in the military for 25 years when this happened. You lifted the weight of fear and of shame and of hiding off of my shoulders. Now, I didn't do anything special after repeal to come out. I didn't make that big a deal about the change. On the actual day of repeal, I flew a flag at my location, which happened to be Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan, to mark this occasion. Most significantly was that when I redeployed, I was able to marry my partner, Tracy, and she became my wife. But it's at this juncture that my story differs greatly from others who have walked this path. Because only a few months after that repeal, I was notified that I had been selected for promotion to Brigadier General. And believe me, we were all paying attention. We all knew that there had not yet been one actively serving general or admiral come out about their lives. Timing. It was only timing that my promotion came up when it did. Tracy and I, we made a joint decision that we were going to be open about our relationship when I got promoted and to weather the uncertainty of what all this meant about being first. It wasn't about our orientation or about making any sort of activist statement. It was about being a military family. I just thought it was good leadership to be visible. I wanted to be a role model that we were just a regular military family. I wanted younger soldiers to know that they had an advocate in relatively high places. But I really didn't know how to do any of this. And despite knowing it was right, I was scared. So the first official person I told about my plan to have Tracy promote me was our public affairs officer. His worried response at how this would play out in the media was, well, you need to decide just right up front. Do you want to be the gay general or just the general? And I was terrified that I was going to have to choose between those two things. I was so naive about what it means to be authentic. I really never had to choose. When Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, there was no magic wand that suddenly made married same-sex couple legally equal. It was much more complicated than that, because we still had this thing called Defense of Marriage Act, And there was super hypersensitivity in my headquarters about not having the Army appear to endorse same-sex marriage, while also balancing that for real, I legally had a wife. The normally routine and standard promotion script now required this detailed legal review to determine if the narrator should call Tracy my wife or my partner. Were the Hepners my in-laws, or were they just Tracy's parents? I went through Army media training to learn how to respond to this being a first for the military. I laugh a little now when I watch the video and I see the mock reporter trying to push some buttons on me with questions like, your activist homosexual partner has been very vocal in blogs and on the internet about military family rights for people like you. How will you get her to tone it down now a little, now that you're a general? I mean, really, who has to prepare for questions like this when they get promoted at work? In the days leading up to the ceremony, my headquarters legislative liaison casually mentioned to me, I went ahead and notified congressional staffers about the promotion. I didn't want Congress to be caught off guard. I kept a straight face, but on the inside, I almost passed out learning that Congress might be paying attention. Because I didn't know how to be visible. I had no skills for this, and I was terrified. My success in the military had come from hiding. What does it mean to be openly gay? I really didn't know how to do this. So Tracy and I, we just moved forward instinctively, guided by authenticity and wanting to lead in the right way, but really getting mixed messages from the local command about our approach. A large blow to my confidence came the day before the ceremony. I was in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I got a message that my new 3-star boss wanted to speak to me. My escort gave me access to this private room, the General MacArthur room, to wait nervously for the call. The conversation was brief and disheartening. The 3-star told me that very senior people were concerned about my ceremony. He conveyed that while it was my personal choice to conduct a public ceremony and to ask anybody I wanted to participate and to attend, I should never forget who I worked for. I should never forget that many people were concerned and that the Army should be protected from anyone who might want to use my promotion for their agenda. I took that to mean homosexual agenda. The call was both purposely vague and purposely direct. I clearly understood the pressure he intended to put on me by telling me that very senior yet anonymous people, obviously more senior than a 3-star general, wanted me to do what? Stay in the closet? Not have Tracy participate in the ceremony? Not speak to the press? I hung up the call having heard, "Don't forget your place." But what was my place now that "Don't ask, don't tell" had been repealed? That call, it totally rattled me. And combined with the congressional discussion, I had doubts that I could go through with it. I replayed in my head all my internalized homophobia tapes. I worried that I was on the verge of letting the Army down, not lifting it up. I worried that I was walking down the wrong path and that maybe the right thing to do was just to avoid being in the news. Because the Army shouldn't be a social experiment. I shouldn't be political by pushing my sexual orientation at an Army event. My anxiety was real. You know, things didn't end well for General MacArthur, relieved from duty in Korea for not following President Truman's orders. And I wondered if somehow the universe was sending me this message by placing me in the MacArthur room to take that call. But Tracy and I, we put on our game faces and we went forward. Our worst fear, the publicity and the media, it kicked in, and there was no turning back. By the time the ceremony was over, someone had built me a Wikipedia page. I was in the international news cycle because this had interest to our allies, and the phone was ringing off the hook for interviews. My friends departing from Reagan National Airport, they text me to say they had seen me on CNN. and my hometown newspaper carried my outing above the fold the following day, which is how I came out to all my high school friends. I didn't do everything right, and I know that some of you have heard me talk about my mistakes along the way. But what I did do right with my executive level public outing was create space for conversations and to give people permission to push their envelope in their own ways in places where these conversations didn't previously take place. Military families sought us out routinely to talk. I have a lesbian daughter who wants to join, but I worry for her. I have a transgender son who wants to be on the wrestling team. How should I talk to the coach? Thank you for telling me your story. I wish I had been more kind to my uncle. Multiple times while telling my story since 2012, I have witnessed the beauty of someone from the audience nervously taking the microphone for a question and instead coming out to the people in the room. I made a solemn promise that I would be visible because so many other people had made this possible for me, and so many people had been kicked out. So many people had been crushed. I felt this urgent need to do everything now, all at once. I couldn't know when it would end, and I always had this sinking feeling that the MacArthur Room expectation of my career ending quickly would come true. I had to lead my own headquarters through the realization that being out wasn't about politics. It was about authenticity. It was about inclusion. It was about Army values of dignity and respect. Back in 2012, I never would have imagined that I would still be in uniform in 2020. And despite my outspokenness and my visibility, that the Army would entrust me with a second star. I learned early in my post-Don't Ask, Don't Tell journey that the Army was also on its own journey. What did it mean for the Army to have openly gay soldiers? Should it ignore them? How do you include them? How do you avoid offending people who disagree? I discovered the military units were having their own MacArthur Room discussions with warnings from the naysayers of all the horrible things that would happen if the base hosted a pride, up against the arguments of those who wanted the military to be inclusive. I found myself in the role of a very senior and safe go-to facilitator at places that still held some hostility and some resistance. Places like Fort Hood, Texas, where my conversation with a 3-star now took the tone of, we've heard from the community and they don't like what we're doing here. We'll have plainclothes agents who are armed there, but we can't totally guarantee it will be safe. We're going to do it anyway. And it was safe. And the day I left from the airport, Tracy and I picked up a newspaper with our photo above the fold, the headline in Killeen, Texas, proclaiming, "It's time to tell." As time passed, I felt less and less anxiety about being above the fold because I came to understand I was giving people I would never meet permission to speak up about their support for inclusion. Tracy and I have experienced so many positive things because of our choice to live our lives openly and honestly. Among our most precious experience has been to live in Army family housing, something that was simply inconceivable when I was a lieutenant who never had the chance to be all I could be. What a journey. As I get ready to hang up my uniform next spring and move to a community as a veteran, I'm so grateful that I have had this experience, all of it, even the difficulties of the 80s and 90s. I hold no regret or animosity for the agents who tried to out me or for the policymakers who painted me as disruptive to good order and discipline. They didn't know me. They only knew the horrible stereotypes spread about people like me. As a veteran, I'll keep my eye on things. We have all seen rights rolled back and our livelihoods impacted by policy reversals. I have personally agonized over the shifting stance impacting our transgender service members who are serving right now, honorably. Nothing is guaranteed, and we should not take our rights for granted, even though in America, we should have the luxury of taking our rights for granted. we must not be complacent. I want young people to be their beautiful, authentic selves. And if the Army is their way out of their small town, I want that for them too. So I'll leave you with a final recollection of my experiences. I remember receiving an instant message after Tracy and I had had the privilege of watching the National Memorial Day Parade atop the reviewing stand. The instant message was from a young soldier who I've never met. He told me, "When I saw you and your wife on the reviewing stand today, I knew that one day I could be a sergeant major and I could be on that stand with a husband." We can bring back now that 1981 recruiting slogan. The next generation can realize what my generation never had, the opportunity to be all that you can be. Thank you.